not going to use a microphone today. I assume you can all hear me. Let me know if you can. First I want to just thank you all for coming out on such a kind of crummy spring day. It suggests that there's an awful lot of intrepid spirit in the room, so I appreciate your being here. So, as Laura said, my name is Dr. Jeff Janata. I'm Chief of Psychology at University Hospitals and Case Medical Center and Case Medical School. And I've been interested in Parkinson's for a long time in terms of the behavioral and the psychological aspects of Parkinson's disease. And some of this comes from it's being quite close to me. My mother-in-law's had Parkinson's disease for 26 years. She's still quite functional, doing very well. But it became clear to me that there were a number of elements of her illness that some of her docs were really not particularly paying attention to. I noticed in spending time with her that she seemed to suffer a lot with the symptoms of Parkinson's, that they were of concern to her, that she was distressed by them in ways that often I would see, when I looked at other kinds of neurologic presentations, other kinds of neurologic illnesses, it seemed as though the people who were suffering from those other kinds of movement disorders didn't seem to be suffering quite as much with symptoms that in some ways were very similar. And so we began to take a look more at whether there was an emotional component that accompanied Parkinson's that was above and beyond what we'd expect with any chronic illness. So we expect with a chronic illness, for example, if you think about the symptoms of depression, with any chronic illness, there is a sense of frustration or demoralization or adjustment struggles that can go hand in hand with any illness, and we expect that. We expect that, for example, we know that depression often presents with loss of interest or loss of pleasure from things that people historically have found rewarding. And we know that if we take pleasurable events away from people, that they'll almost always develop symptoms of depression. We know this because there were studies that were done in and around the Second World War. And in the Second World War, if you were a conscientious objector, you were pressed into service nonetheless, often as a volunteer. And one of the studies that were done in Minnesota in the 30s and 40s, demonstrated that if you take a perfectly healthy person and if you remove them from things they find pleasurable, they will develop depressive symptoms. So, if you take a healthy 22-year-old guy and you learn that the things that help to stabilize and maintain his mood, his activities, his recreation, the things he enjoys doing, if you systematically take those things away, what naturally occurs is a depressive response. Does that make sense to you? That if you stop doing things you enjoy, that your mood suffers. And so that seems to be part and parcel of what happens when people get any chronic illness. So with Parkinson's, you may not be able to do some of the activities you used to do, and you miss those activities that help regulate your mood. If you have heart disease and you can't engage in recreational activity the way you used to, your mood may suffer. If you have a neurologic condition that's not Parkinson's, if you have a stroke, for example, then the loss of activities that you previously found rewarding or stimulating or pleasurable will naturally lead to a depressive response. But Parkinson's seemed to have a little bit extra. There seemed to be more than that natural kind of loss of pleasure contributing to depressed mood. And what's difficult about this is people think of depression in terms of the very severe kind of depression. When you think about someone who's depressed, you might, the image that comes to mind is someone who is melancholy and sad and withdrawn and frequently tearful. That's certainly a version of depression that we all share, but other signs and symptoms of depression can be much more subtle than that. And that tends to be more the kind of thing that people with Parkinson's disease are prone to, at a rate that approaches, in most studies, 50%. So the question is why? Why would it be quite that high? And I think that let's start by just talking about what depression is more broadly than the melancholic, sad, tearful version of depression we have. Symptoms of depression, and I'm going to start using this board here. If we think about what it means to be depressed, the kinds of things that come to mind, other than sadness and melancholy, are what? What do you think of when you think of depressive symptoms?
Inactivity.
Loss of interest.
Loss of interest. So, loss of interest in things that previously brought you pleasure. Loss of the sense of being stimulated by, not just having the motivation, the urge to get up and get out and be active. What else?
Frustration.
Frustration. A sense of frustration with, not only with symptoms, but also across the board. You might find yourself more irritable. Irritability. And mood fragility. Have any of you had the experience where you feel as though your mood is too fragile, where you have a more pronounced response than you might think? Like, when those commercials come on TV, and it's the grandkid calling up his grandmother, and it's real sweet, and you get all kind of, that's so, the kid's calling his grandmother because it's an AT&T commercial. You might have a more pronounced response to that than you would otherwise, and it feels like your mood's fragile. What else? Sleepiness. Sleepiness. Just spell this now. Sleepiness, fatigue. Any others?
Inability to do what you
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Sadness.
Sadness.
How about appetite?
Decreased appetite, absolutely.
Insomnia.
Insomnia.
Some people take to drinking.
That's true.
Or excessive.
That's true. And drinking is what she was saying. That people can, in the context of feeling some of these symptoms, they can try to address them, make themselves feel better with alcohol. What's the problem? The fundamental problem with drinking and depression is what, you suppose? It causes depression, right? Alcohol, after all, is a central nervous system depressant. So if we're depressed and we respond to that by overusing alcohol, then in essence what we're doing is we're making the problem worse. Because if you introduce a central nervous system depressant to someone who's already depressed, they might feel better, they might feel some euphoric effect of the alcohol in the immediate term, but over the longer haul, that actually makes depression worse. Other symptoms that you think of with depression, yeah.
A change in appearance,
That's interesting.
more down, not taking care of themselves.
Well, that's true. I think that it is true that when people are depressed, they don't pay as much attention to their appearance. They often become somewhat socially withdrawn. If you think about, what people do when they're feeling ill at ease or distressed, they often withdraw. They don't have the energy, maybe. Did I put energy on here? Fatigue, loss of energy. They often don't feel the energy to get up and get out and do things, which is why events like this walk, for example, are so important that the Parkinson Foundation is sponsoring. But there's also a sense of low motivation. where there's loss of drive that can be a symptom. And some of that loss of drive and some of that sort of social withdrawal then naturally has us care less and less about how we present ourselves. A friend of mine says that one of the great things, she talks about this as crust management. She says when she's feeling low, she gets dressed up. And by presenting better, she feels better about herself. Other symptoms that you think of as consistent with depression? Yes, sir.
At times, driving privileges are taken away. At times, driving.
If driving privilege is taken away, that's kind of, I would say that one of the things that represents is not only loss of an activity that brings you pleasure, but loss of a sense of independence. In our culture, we think of driving not only as being a pleasurable activity in and of itself. I love to drive. But it also represents for a lot of people a loss of independence, and a loss of ability to connect with the things that they enjoy doing. If you like going out to shop, or if you like going out to go fishing, or if you like to go out to dinner, and you don't have the capacity to drive, then that can restrict your access to things you find pleasurable, the kinds of things that help to keep our mood stable. What else?
But not talking as much.
Talking.
You know, like talking, like, that's what my husband does. He
Yes.
doesn't talk.
That's exactly right.
It's only his interests.
I think that's a wonderful point. This notion of that one of the cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's can be hypophonia, so-called, that you lose volume of speech, and as a result, you can feel some social awkwardness. You can feel as though it's hard to be understood, and socializing and social support and social contact with other people is one of the main issues that keeps our mood stable. And so essentially what that does is that means that there is a predominant symptoms of Parkinson's that affects our social ability and therefore our mood stability. Anything else? These are wonderful. Some I haven't thought of, like that one actually.
Yeah, well, he has that. How about, I don't know if this is one of the side effects for Parkinson. He closes his eyes all the time. I don't know, is that a part of it or
It
not?
can be. It can be.
That's what he has. He's talking to somebody and all of a sudden he just closes his eyes. And I go, is he sleeping? I go, no, he just closes his eyes.
Yeah.
We
So I
have
don't
the
know
same
if that's-
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Really?
yeah, it is both potentially a byproduct of the Parkinson's, as it can also be a byproduct of some of the medications that are used to treat Parkinson's. So my mother-in-law, for example, as you're saying, will say that when she gets up in the morning, she often struggles to get her eyes open. She feels as though it takes her half an hour or so before she can really open up her eyes. And again, that sort of symptom is frustrating and naturally leads to some sense of being, that loss of capacity, loss of control of our bodies. Coordination. The fundamental issue with Parkinson's is that the neurons just aren't connecting in the way they're supposed to. So they fire randomly, so suddenly activity that's coordinated is interrupted. So physical coordination, balance, ability to control fine muscle motor activity and so forth can be affected.
Yeah.
And you think about what that means then in terms of what you no longer may be doing that you used to enjoy. Again, it comes back to this issue of the loss of stimulation, of social contact, of activity, all of which that contribute to a mood that's downregulated.
Compulsive obsessive behavior.
So the comment is compulsive obsessive behavior. I think that you're right. When we think about compulsive behavior, we think about that as an anxiety issue. But in truth, a lot of people find that ritualized behavior, compulsive behavior, serves to regulate our mood a little bit. There's a reason, for example, that all the major religions use ritual as a way of making us feel better, right? Isn't that part of what accompanies most of the religions? They have ritual behaviors And those rituals comfort us. Similarly, we ourselves can find that ritualized behavior can serve a mood regulating function. So you're right, compulsive behavior can be one of those things. Sir?
The ability to stay focused.
Concentration, thank you. That's a big one. There are cognitive changes. Cognitive changes that go hand in hand with depression. Those include focus, concentration, distractibility. Great, yes. You guys should be giving this talk. I'll say.
I don't know where this would fall in, but like, acting out dreams physically to where I have considered moving to another bedroom, which saddens me and depresses me because I'm afraid of hurting my husband.
Because of more active movement when you're asleep.
Active, yeah, movement or screaming.
Yeah. So the comment is that dream states can be exaggerated. Dream states can be exaggerated. Do any of you experience particularly intense dreams or nightmares? Yeah. That's not uncommon. It's not uncommon first because there's a prominent sleep disorder that can accompany Parkinson's. Sleep regulation can be interfered with, and getting adequate rest is important to maintaining stable mood. It's also the case that there are some serotonergic medications that people take that can actually keep us stuck in a particular stage of sleep where dreams are particularly vivid. Dreams can be vivid. People will talk about nightmares that are vivid. They'll say, now that I've been on this medication, I'm dreaming in Technicolor, where I wasn't dreaming that way before. And that can be a disturbing symptom. It can lead to problems with spouses. It can lead to sleep dysregulation and have us feeling less restored and refreshed when we wake up in the morning. That in and of itself can contribute to depression.
He might have a big scratch on his head. And next morning, I
Yeah.
wake up and there's blood on the pillow,
Yeah.
and it's all scratched. Whoa,
Yeah.
what happened? You know,
Yeah.
and he said, oh, I don't know, I must have had a dream or something.
Yeah. Any other symptoms you think of as being part of depression? Let me see if there are any on my list. There's prominent, in some of the people that I see, there's kind of a prominent sense of hopelessness, of worthlessness, of loss of identity, of guilt. An awful lot of guilt can go hand in hand with chronic illness in general, but Parkinson's in particular. So now let's get back to what I was saying in the beginning. These things seem to be more pronounced in Parkinson's disease than they are in other neurologic issues, in other movement disorders. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that dopamine in the brain is the thing that seems to be the common, in a particular part of the brain, there is a diminution, a decrease in dopamine. And dopamine for years has been called the happy neurotransmitter. We think about dopamine as serving pleasure, as being the neurotransmitter that helps us to feel energized and active and alert and coordinating our thoughts and feelings, coordinating our emotions, and so forth. And Parkinson's in particular reduces dopamine. That's why you take some of the medications you do. They're designed to increase the dopamine that's available to you. And dopamine has long been thought to be a prominent issue in depression. That there is a connection between a diminution in dopamine on the one hand and depression on the other. So this is more, these things that we're identifying here are more than just a normal consequence of loss of function, a normal consequence of loss of ability to do things or be independent or be social or pursue pleasure. These are issues that specifically also relate to loss of dopamine in the brain. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment that those can also be transferred to the caregiver.
Yeah.
Because you see, frustrations, your inability, when you see
That's true.
your spouse, you know, doing this, and then you
Yeah.
get or you're up at night because, you know, he's not sleeping right, and you wake up and you're, you know, so it's,
Yeah, so
it could be easily transferred to.
yeah, so the comment is that, I'll paraphrase, that these symptoms can be contagious. That there is a contagion of mood. That when we see someone that we love struggling, we struggle too. We have empathy and we have compassion for someone we care about. And so when they struggle, we struggle. When they have loss of pleasure, sometimes we do too. Sometimes the ways in which our social circle, our world, is restricted to as an accompaniment of being a caretaker. So you're absolutely right. It wasn't that long ago that I gave one of these same talks on caregiver depression, on the fact that it's not technically a contagion. I don't mean that literally, but there is a contagious quality to mood. When someone you love is demoralized or down, you tend to be demoralized yourself. If they feel hopeless, you're more likely to feel hopeless, and so forth.
I feel a lot of frustration.
You do. Yeah, and again, this is entirely normal. And the problem is that caregivers often feel guilty about it. That's hard, and they feel a sense that, you know, maybe I'm not doing a good job, or, you know, I ought to be more supportive, or my mood needs to be higher to compensate for his mood that's lower. Those kinds of things are a normal component to Parkinson's disease and to caregiving for people who have Parkinson's. So when we think about what of these things is connected to dopamine, that neurotransmitter in the brain that's so important, we think of loss of interest, we think of sleepiness, we think of decreased appetite, we think of insomnia, and we think of the cognitive elements that are so much an accompaniment to Parkinson's disease. These are things that are tied specifically to loss of dopamine. So, if this is the case, if these are all common to the point that a true diagnosis of depression occurs 50% of the time. 50% of people with Parkinson's disease at some point or other will be diagnosed with depression. And so if these all go hand in hand with that disease, then the question is, how can you fight back? Right? What are we going to do about this? How can you address these issues? And let's take each of these in turn. How might you influence loss of interest in things? If you don't have the motivation and the drive, the get up and go that you did before, you've kind of lost interest in things you used to find pleasurable, how do you combat that? What might you do? Yeah.
Just like you said, get up, put your makeup on, and get going.
Yeah, put your makeup on. I like to put my makeup on. That's for sure. I don't feel right unless I have my blush on. But you're right. You're absolutely right. That sometimes we have to, if we push ourselves to do things that we're a little bit disinclined to do, we end up feeling better as a result. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've worked all day long, I'm tired at the end of the day, and my wife says, you know, we're going out to dinner with some friends tonight, and I just think, I don't want to do that. That's the last thing in the world I want to do. But when I do it, I find that I enjoy it way more than I thought I would. I rally, I get out and do it, and in fact, I feel better. You've all had that same experience, I know. You've all had that experience where when you push yourselves to get over that hump, to boost up your motivation and do something that you know you'll enjoy, but you're just not driven to do. To identify things that you find pleasurable, that you find rewarding, that you find stimulating, and make sure to make them a part of your schedule. Reintroduce those things that you might not have continued to do in some form or fashion. You may not, you may have to modify those things in some way to accommodate the effects of illness, but you still can enjoy things that you historically have enjoyed. And when you systematically put those in place in your life, you find that your mood improves. you push back against the dopamine hypothesis. Yeah.
He, 35 years golf.
Yep.
He dropped out. We didn't tell any of his buddies, besides he dropped out for, how long was it, a year or two? 1 year he dropped out. We ran into a couple of the buddies actually at a baseball game.
Yeah.
And I said to him, go tell him, just go tell him.
Yeah.
And he went and told them, and they said, oh my God, is that all? You better get back to the league. And he did. He went back to the league.
Yeah.
And
So that's a great example of how we can return. If you think about what it is about golf that's pleasurable, for example, your example, a significant part of that pleasure comes from the social aspect. And I've known an awful lot of people who return to their golf game even if they don't still play. They ride around in the cart and spend the day with the guys and go out to lunch afterward, and they get a significant percentage of the pleasure they would have gotten otherwise. And they sidestep the social awkwardness or embarrassment or whatever it is that's keeping them from re-engaging in something they enjoy. I've heard this, there are 100 examples of this. People who have stopped going out to dinner because they can't be heard over the din of the restaurant. They've stopped going to movies because they struggle with getting up and down the stairs. They've stopped going to church because it's painful to sit in the pew. They've stopped doing things that historically they found pleasurable. And what helps is to find ways to accommodate those things that you have found so enjoyable in the past to fit your current state. So, you can still go out with the golf game. You can still go with the bowling team. You can still go to church. You can still engage in youth activities. You can still coach softball even if you're not playing it anymore. Whatever it is, I would encourage you to find ways to adapt a new way of exposing yourself to the same thing that always brought you pleasure in the past. And if you do that, and you do it rather systematically, I think you'll find that your mood improves. Sleepiness. What can we do about sleepiness? How many of you have interrupted sleep?
Yeah.
That's a big deal, right? It's a big deal. Sleep disturbance is a prominent part of depressed mood, and not feeling well rested. Anybody who, here's Laura in the back, whose son is an orthopedic resident right now, and I suspect if she talked to him and she said, on those nights when you have to be 36 hours on service and then 12 hours off, what's your mood like the next day? And a healthy 34-year-old son will say, my mood's more fragile, I don't concentrate as well, I don't have the motivation, I don't have the energy, I don't have the drive, I feel depleted, my energy level is low. That's the natural outgrowth of sleep disturbance. And so how do we address that? Well, there are some strategies that your docs can tell you about, obviously, to help regulate sleep with medications, but there are also things that we can do. First, the most important part of regulating sleep is to get up at the same time every day. We find when we study behavioral strategies for improving sleep that if people set a wake-up time to be the same time every day, that their body is more likely to fall into a natural regulatory mood. What ends up happening with people is they don't get adequate sleep, then they take a couple of naps during the day, then at bedtime they're not sleepy, so they're up till 2 a.m., they watch TV and mess around, and then they don't sleep well, then they get up later the next morning, and the whole thing falls apart. The body works best if we have regular sleep. Our bodies work best if we get into a sleep rhythm. And we set our rhythm, not by when we go to bed, we set it by when we wake up. If we set a wake-up time, if we say, I'm going to get up every morning at 8 o'clock, and we fall into that rhythm of always getting up at 8 o'clock, and if we suppress napping if we can during the day, then what happens is the body gets back into a more normal rhythm of sleep. We feel more rested in the morning. It takes about 30 days to do this. It takes a long time. It's a habit of the body. But if you keep at it, and you structure your sleep, and you make that schedule a part of your day, get up at the same time every morning, you're going to find that gradually you're not quite as sleepy, gradually you have a little bit more energy, gradually you have a little bit more motivation as your sleep cycle regulates. That's an important part of this whole process. How about appetite changes? It's interesting. Some people have decreased appetite, some people have increased appetite. If you have increased appetite, it's much more likely to relate to the serotonin neurotransmitter system. If you have decreased appetite, it's much more likely that it's related to dopamine. So you're more likely to have decreased appetite. How do you address that?
What I do is, I give him a treat sometimes, you know, and I go to Burger King and he eats that, no problem. It's a treat,
Excellent.
you know, that's what I do.
Little plug for Burger King here.
Or it could be Arby's, or, you know, little things, or like we're going to fish fry tonight, like, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
other food,
yeah,
vegetable, forget it.
yeah. One of the things that contributes to appetite for sure is having food that we like, having food that we enjoy, food that tastes good to us. But there are also not. How many of you crave sweets as a function of this? Is this a new thing? Is this and did this accompany the diagnosis of Parkinson's? That sweet craving? Sweet foods and too much sweet foods in your diet actually makes the problem worse. Because when you eat sweets, I tell you, I go to my mother-in-law's apartment. She has a bowl of M&Ms here, and then there are Jolly Ranchers here, and then there are, you know, candy bars over here, and then we've got a whole tray of those sweet cinnamon rolls. I mean, she's always got a cake. It's unbelievable. And the problem with that is, first of all, it artificially suppresses appetite for healthier foods. Second, sweets make the dopaminergic cycle worse. Because when we eat a sweet, it's like caffeine. Caffeine does the same thing. Sweets will artificially increase our energy over the short term, but suppress it over the long term. It's really not so good for us. So what I would suggest to you, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm a shrink, but I'll tell you, it's the truth that if you work to try to reduce the frequency and amount of sweets you're eating and substitute foods that are more tyramine based, you'll do better. So instead of having the Jolly Rancher or the M&Ms, have a banana.
What about sugar?
Have an apple. What about what?
Sugarless
Candy.
Sugarless candy?
You know when you have the aspartame?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, I doubt that sugarless candies are bad for you in the same way that sugar candies are, but why bother, right? It's a little bit like if you're going to have a cup of coffee, but it's not going to have caffeine and not going to have sugar and not going to have, why bother, right? It's the why bother version of a cup of coffee.
Like a pudding or something like that.
If it tastes good and you enjoy sugarless pudding, I don't think it'll hurt you. But my point would be, if you're craving something sweet, why not simultaneously give yourself something that turns out to be a dopamine precursor?
Like
So
a
if
banana or
you
an
eat a
apple.
banana or an apple, you're actually going to increase your dopamine production. So feed your sweet tooth, but feed it with something that actually might be helpful for you. That'd be what I'd suggest. How about the cognitive side? How about the cognitive side of this? Distractibility, problems with focus, problems with concentration. How might we address that component of a depressed response?
What I do with him is I don't act like I'm dumb, but but there's a word that I don't understand. He'll give me a definition. He's like a encyclopedia. He knows, and it's really good for him. Even though like I'll say a word, whatever, and he just explains it to me.
Good.
It's really, so that's good
Yep.
for him to do that.
Well, and even more broadly than that, what I would say is that social interaction keeps us
Right.
stimulated, keeps our brains active. And depression or depressive symptoms, even if it doesn't rise to the level of full-blown depression, has us tend to turn inward. And what we need to do is make sure that we're turning outward. We're turning out to other people. You're coming to events like this. You're talking to your spouse. You're making sure that your social network is maintained. What else helps with memory and concentration?
In the paper, I do like the word scrambles
Yeah.
and puzzles and, regular puzzles and that. It can take me a long time,
Yeah.
but, yeah, I do that.
to do crosswords, to do word scrambles, just to read. The percentage of people who find that Parkinson's symptoms get in the way of reading. People have trouble with visual problems, and so they've cut back on reading, and that's an important part of what stimulates our brain and keeps us thinking and keeps us active. So we have to find alternatives. We have to go to larger print books, for example. My mother-in-law has a Kindle, and we just turn up make the font bigger. A lot of people will, instead of reading a physical book now, will listen to what I used to call books on tape. They're not on tape anymore, but they're audiobooks. So that, again, you're stimulating that part of the brain that gets activated and stimulated when we read, when we learn something new. And I think that kind of, we have to think of our brain as though it's a muscle. And it's a muscle whose activation and whose engagement makes it stronger. The more we think, the more we interact with other people, the more we read, the more we learn, the more we, for example, if you've historically played music, keep playing music. It's remarkable how the studies of the neuronal development of neurons in the brain is stimulated by making music. And it can be anything. You can drum on the table. If you play the piano, keep playing the piano. If you struggle with muscular control and your piano playing isn't good as it used to be, that's okay. Because it's better for you to continue to play an instrument or to sing or to engage the brain in various ways. And music is another one of those. Yeah?
There's In Motion that we go to.
Yeah.
They started an art class.
Yeah.
And I like to draw. My husband never did. He's the artist. So I said to him, let's go. And the first, times he went, he was like, he wasn't very interested. And then all of a sudden, the girl that was drawing next to me says, look at your husband, look at your husband. He got so focused and engaged and was drawing this, it was like, I said, wow.
It was good.
It was good. I showed them the picture.
So,
He was an artist.
so I would say, if you can engage in creativity like that, creative activity, new stimulating activities, that's enormously helpful in cognitive, in maintaining cognitive function and developing new neurons. Yeah.
Did you want to go into social anxiety or phobias or any of that?
I can do that. Let's finish with this, and I'll take a few minutes to talk about that too. Because the last thing I really want to talk about is the enormous beneficial effect of exercise on mood. The topic we have yet to talk about really is that that exercise has been shown to have profound effects on mood. Obviously, it has profound effects on your illness progression, on symptom progression, on retaining a sense of independence and function, but it also has primary benefit to mood. We feel better when we exercise. We may not feel better when we start, but we feel better when we're finished. And so when there is availability of exercise in whatever form, if people have done very well if they have gotten involved in exercise programs. For example, the kind they have at In Motion, or the kind that you can set up your own exercise routine. You can work with a physical therapist or a trainer to come up with something that works for you. But routine exercise has beneficial effects that are hard to underscore enough. it helps in so many ways. It helps to release endorphins in the body, which are the body's own natural opiates. It helps by helping our sleep regulation. People who are active in exercise tend to sleep much better. You all know, you remember the deepest, most restorative sleeps I've ever had are after a day of real activity. Not that long ago I helped my son move. I was moving furniture all day. I slept solidly. And it was because I was physically tired out. And so it's important that we find things like exercise to tire us out physically during the day, because that's when our body really then goes into a restorative kind of sleep cycle. So that's really the last thing I wanted to say in terms of your own mood regulation. I will be sure to include exercise as a part of your regimen on a daily or near daily basis if you can. Yes?
Do you have a particular game or something else that you prefer in the boxing, for example?
Like is boxing.
Yeah.
Is there, I don't know that there's any evidence to suggest that one exercise is better than another. What I would say to you is, the best exercise to do is the one that you'll do. Right? I mean, our county is littered with treadmills in basements that are now serving to hang clothes on. And so pick an exercise that you enjoy. The most beneficial exercise is the exercise you will actually do. Some people love to do water aerobics, to walk in the water. Some people love to do exercises with weights. Others like to do isometrics. Others like to do exercise that's a component of an activity that they enjoy. So the trick is, as far as I'm concerned, that there isn't any evidence to suggest that one exercise is better than another. I would suggest that the importance is that you do something, that you pick one that you think that you enjoy anyway. I happen to find I love to row, and I find a rowing machine to be enormously satisfying exercise. But that's because I have all this, these warm memories of being a kid and going to camp and rowing a boat around a little lake. I love that. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with why I'm drawn to it now. It's something that I get pleasure from, and so therefore I'm more likely to do it.
Well, just walking.
Just walking, yeah.
I did the hula hoop 1,000.
The hula hoop. I think we have the Guinness Book of World Record hula hoop.
The trainer, I can't jump rope because of my knees.
Oh, I couldn't keep
He
it up
handed me
anymore.
this hula hoop, and I go, I haven't done this since I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, do it. And I have now worked up to 1,000 times.
Well, I think that deserves a round of applause. Yeah. So the comment is that he's afraid to get back on his bike and he's wondering about a three-wheeler. So this dovetails very nicely with our question about anxiety. Because one of the problems with, one of the things that people find is that if they start to distrust their ability to coordinate their movement, they become apprehensive and fearful of doing things that they might otherwise do. So some of the freezing states that people can get into are heavily influenced by apprehension, fear of falling, fear of loss of control. And I think that if you enjoy biking and you find that that brings you pleasure, I don't think there's anything in the world wrong with getting a trike. I think that's potentially a great idea. You can also ride a stationary bike if you find that equally enjoyable. A lot of people don't. They want to get out on the towpath or ride around the neighborhood or get out in nature, and they find, pedaling while looking at a brick wall in front of them just not to be very interesting. But a perfectly reasonable accommodation might be a trike. Absolutely. I think it's a good idea.
I always felt that was for real old people.
Well, it's either for real old or real young, and everybody in between. I think that there's nothing, I think that's another apprehension. We get caught up too much in our worry about how we'll be perceived by others. We get caught up in our sense of ourselves and are not quite wanting to concede to our age or our illness or both. And so, because we don't quite want to feel embarrassed, then we don't go out and do something that would be good for us. That's really, I think we have to work to get over our social awkwardness or our sense of self-consciousness enough to engage in the things that really are going to benefit us. And reality is that once you start to engage in them, you'll find that it's not as uncomfortable as you might think. But that's that apprehensive anxiety. That's that sense of being apprehensive about doing something without actually kind of giving it a try. That's one component of anxiety. The other is worry. Apprehension and worry are different things. People often will ruminate and worry and stew about themselves, their bodies, their illness, the future. And that kind of rumination and worry can be very corrosive of mood, but it can also be its own source of distress. And it can have a contagion. There can be a worry contagion where we start to fall into a pattern of seeking reassurance. And you find that
Well,
useful?
that's the most you can do.
All right. You find that useful? You like that? You enjoy it?
Well,
She's saying that
some exercise.
Sure. She's saying that the adaptation that you've made is to use a stationary pedaler
Right.
and sit in a chair and
Right.
pedal against some resistance. And I think that, again, what I would say is the best exercise is the exercise you will do. If you find that to be convenient, it's easy to do, it's right there, you can talk or watch TV or do whatever you want while you're doing that, more power. I think that's great. Other questions or comments? Anything we haven't covered that you wanted to hear about?
Can you explain again, Alex, the anxiety work?
So the question is, can I explain how anxiety works? So we're all wired to experience anxiety. Anxiety ideally should be a signal to us, so that if you think about anxiety, anxiety stimulates our ability to handle a threat. So when we get anxious, a whole fight or flight mechanism begins to kick in, and we gear up to handle a threat of some kind. That is a natural and adaptive mechanism that works very well for us if there's a mastodon that's charging us, if there's a real threat. The problem is that we tend to activate that same mechanism for things that aren't really life-threatening. We do that because what's happened is that throughout history, evolution has wiped out the folks who did not have a good anxiety mechanism, right? So if you can imagine 1,000 generations ago, your forefather was out in the field and there was a mastodon charging, and he decided he was going to just slaughter that mastodon instead of run for the cave. He got removed from the gene pool. And so successively over time, what we've done is we have genetically reinforced anxiety. So we're all left with a heightened sense of anxiety. And political parties and TV all know this. They'll say, what's on your dinner plate may be killing you. News at 11. And that makes us all anxious. We have to turn on the news at 11 o'clock to find out if it's the peas, right? So we're wired to experience anxiety. And our task is to try to find ways to tap that anxiety off. And to use exercise to tap that off, to identify what things tend to be stressful for us, and learn coping strategies to deal with those things. Worry about our future is probably not that adaptive unless it leads to problem solving, unless it leads to us solving a problem that may really exist. But once we've solved the problem, then we need to learn to kind of put that aside. And worry and rumination are one of those things that sometimes people really need help to learn how to manage better. And I would encourage you, if worry and anxiety is a prominent part of what you're struggling with, that you consider talking with somebody about that. Yeah.
When I was 9 months old, my mother had her first nervous breakdown. And then for 25 years, she developed an agoraphobia. She feared people, feared crowds. She wouldn't go anywhere. She never left the house.
Yeah. Well,
So what could you comment on that?
on agoraphobia,
Mhm.
yeah, people who have what's called agoraphobia start to fear being out in public, out around other people. They tend to withdraw, and withdrawing suppresses the anxiety, but what it does is that then it reinforces us for not engaging with other people, and it becomes a cycle. The more we fear being out in public and around other people, the more we withdraw. We feel safe, but then we're not stimulated, we're not active, we're not engaged, and that can be a downward spiral. That's kind of the way agoraphobia works. I think we probably need to stop after one more question, so you get the one.
Oh, thank you. You've discussed a lot of ways to counteract the anxiety and depression, food, sleep, exercise, but I haven't heard any mention of medications, and I wondered where that fits in the scheme of things, because sometimes it's the first thing suggested or whatever.
Often it is, and I specifically didn't include that as a part of this discussion because what I wanted to emphasize was strategies that you can use to take control of your own mood and your anxiety. But there's no question there are medications that are very helpful. The issue is that some of those medications interact badly with Parkinson's medications, and so we've got to be careful about which ones we use and how we use them. But there's no question that antidepressants can be very helpful, both with anxiety and with depression. And typically when we study this, what we find is that a combination of antidepressants on the one hand, plus your own self-management strategies like we've talked about today, both together work better than either alone. So in the case in which you have depressive symptoms, I would encourage you to bring that up to your doc, to the neurologist you see. What happens is that often these, because this is kind of where I started, because people don't perceive themselves as depressed in the classic sense, they're not tearful all the time, they're not melancholy, they're not sad, deeply frustrated. That kind of, the common conception of depression is not what they're experiencing. And so they tend not to think about these other things as really, truly also being symptoms of depression. So what I would encourage you to do is to bring those up to your docs. Your docs have strategies. They have medications that they can use that are helpful. They have networks of people like me who work with their patients specifically around these kinds of issues. But what happens is that the Parkinson's symptoms often are so prominent that that's all you have time to get to. Don't allow that to happen. Go in with a list of the issues and make sure that if these are on that list, that you include those as well. Because that way, because people have a sense of that they tend to underplay depressive symptoms and over-attend to the physical symptoms of Parkinson's. And I think that that represents a loss of an opportunity to have these issues addressed. So with that, I'll thank you. Thank you very much for coming.